Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to open the meeting and welcome everyone to this ordinary meeting of Council on the 14th of November 2017. Moonee Valley Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to their spirits, ancestors, elders, past and present. Council also extends their respect to their elders and descendants of other Aboriginal people here today. Ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of broadcast tonight, I'm happy for you to stay seated as the broadcast picks your microphones up a lot easier. So if you feel free to remain seated, but if you'd like to stand, it's also quite acceptable as well for the time being. Councillors, I don't believe we have any apologies for tonight. And the third agenda on the item is the confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmation of minutes for the ordinary meeting of Council held on the 24th of October 2017 and the minutes of the statutory meeting held on the 9th of November? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Nation. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item? Councillor Nation? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried. Councillors, declaration. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda? Councillor Nation.
Yes, Mayor. I have a conflict of interest in item 12.1, indirect conflicting duty, for reasons disclosed to the CEO prior to the commencement of the meeting.
Sure. Okay. Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a conflict of interest in relation to 9.6. Buckley Street level crossing removal project update due to residential amenity, as I own a property in close proximity to that project.
Thank you. Item number 5 on the agenda, presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? No presentations. We'll go to item number 6, petitions and joint letters. Councillors, do we have any petitions or joint letters? Councillor Nation.
Yes, Mayor. I have a joint letter signed by business owners and residents in the Newmarket area requesting that Council consider installing CCTV cameras along Racecourse Road.
Thank you. Any other petitions? I'll go to item number 7, questions from the public. We now move to questions from the public, and I ask Mr. Brian Lancaster whether we have received any questions for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no questions from the public tonight.
Councillors, will move to reports of councillors. The report of councillors, a written report by the Mayor and councillors will be presented to the second ordinary council meeting of each month. We'll move to the first report on the agenda, and on 9.1, council report on tonight's agenda is on page 5 and relates to a planning application 173 to 177 Pascoe Road, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I'll move motion in line with the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. It's nice to remain seated. The proposal before us with this this development is on an existing, or has been a pre-existing auto electrician business for many, many years. And as the nature of all auto electrician businesses, there's a lot of cars that are in and out of that and parked all over the neighbourhood and so on like that. We had an extensive look at this, even though only one person arrived for the consultation meeting, which is a shame. And the significant discussion point in that, however, was around the movement of traffic in and out of Lethbridge Street, and I consider that is still an unresolved issue and will only get worse over time. Not necessarily because of this development, but it is a continuing problem in that neighbourhood where people are using a lot of back alleyways and laneways and so on like that to walk and commute. And it goes down to a very sensitive area at Heritage Street and so on like that. However, thinking about those restrictions, the biggest part of this development is a proposal for 4 stories. Now, the presiding general design development overlay along most of Pascoe Vale Road between Buckley Street and down to the Queen's Park is around 3 stories. There are a couple that have snuck through that are 4 stories. This development, however, is very close to Buckley Street. It's also very closely related to where the service station is on that corner, and the potential in the near future for all of those sites, which are all commercially zoned, is for them to be in and around the four levels pitch. The considerable consideration has been given to what happens with the rear of this development. The laneway is still being maintained as a laneway. There is a separate entrance point into the building and into the development that is not, so we're not using the laneway. But the question is that is the laneway a big enough buffer between the rear of this development and the houses that are in Lethbridge Street? So in proposing that this be accepted as a proposition for the council, all I can say to you is that there has been significant negotiation to bring back the second level and increase that setback, and also the third level. There is still always going to be 4 levels visible, if you like, in Lethbridge Street. However, the development has been shifted back on that part of its footprint, and if you take into account the width of the laneway and those setbacks, there is some significant relief. Also, the developer has looked at and clearly modified things around the external finishes, and has also looked at the internal amenity to increase the capacity for cars that are parking in there, and also for light and ambience of the users of the property, or future residents of the property. It's not the most desirable design, but there is at least a couple of things working in its favour. One is that there is a lot of light in the place, there is a lot of glass. It allows a lot of natural light to circulate through the place, and it is twinned to some degree with the building that is being also developed on the other corner of Lethbridge. So there is, and it's a similar it's the same developer, frankly, but that one is at 3 levels, noting and respecting the move down into Pascoe Vale Road towards Queen's Park from that corner. So while it's, again, as I said, not the most perfect development, it essentially passes muster, and would be one that I would think we would have some difficulty defending within in a VCAT area if it was to go that way. And so I call on you to call on the members of the council to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack, and welcome, Councillor Serace. No, that's fine. No, that's fine. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I take it the custom is now we're seated, so I will stay seated. Councillor Cusack's given quite a comprehensive review of this application, which is before VCAT at present, I think, because of a failure to decide. It is located on Pascoe Vale Road, in a commercial zone where we do encourage higher density. The interface of having commercial on the bottom is noted in the report as being a positive. And as Councillor Cusack picked up, there have been some concessions in the plans and throughout the process of this application coming before us, which have been small wins, I guess, and improvements with setbacks. And we also have conditioned some of the traffic implications as well, particularly with vehicles accessing the property. Another thing of merit, it's good to see that there's housing diversity. We've got a lot of 2-bedders, not too many 1-bedders, and only a small waiver in car parking spaces, which is based on residential visitors and the commercial premises. The aesthetic of it is interesting. It's probably not necessarily to my taste, but it is similar to a lot of what is popping up along Pascoe Vale Road, either applications that have already been built or those that have been approved or even before us pending approval. So with the concessions that have been made throughout the process, and noting it's at VCAT now, I do rise, so I don't rise anymore because I'm seated, but I would rise to support Councillor Cusack's motion to endorse the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor, and as tempted as I am to stand, I will remain seated also. I have some concerns about this, and for me, that interface with the properties in Lethbridge Street, I would much have preferred that we actually go along with the recommendation in relation to conditions of the urban design officer, and that was a recommendation to reduce the built form to 3 stories and then have a double-storey interface to the rear laneway. I think that would have provided a better outcome, certainly for the people in Lethbridge. I acknowledge that this will be a site that there is a higher density development at, just by the nature of it and given what else has happened on Pascoe Vale Road. But that height, given the proximity to the Lethbridge properties, does concern me. And again, my favourite thing, the use of a stacker. For me, in light of those potential traffic issues that were referred to by Councillor Cusack earlier, that also gives me some concern as to how they will be managed. And I'm not convinced that a stacker is the best proposal in this instance. So unless I hear some compelling debate otherwise, will be unlikely to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Cusack, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, none of these big developments are ever going to be tidy to the extent that they're going to address all of the issues comfortably that a community needs. I just draw your attention to the fact that in terms of the negotiations that have gone on and modifications to the advertised plans, there's been increased just looking for my little note, the pedestrian visibility signage and mechanical alerts and so on like that have been added to this particular development. The other important issue to note is that there is a twinning, and it can't be not acknowledged in this, with the building that is being developed right now across the road from it, and that one side of Lethbridge Street down to the lane at the rear on the south side is being developed with a significant frontage onto Lethbridge, and so too this one will be as well. Irrespective of how you go about and look at these developments, there is going to be something of at least 3 levels, and this one has the 4th level setback. I can't obviously apologise for the way it's gone and been developed and put on the table in front of us, but I do think that in general terms it mounts up against all of the yardsticks you would use in terms of making the judgments on the basis of what planning regulations we have, and it's attempted to maximise a number of things that are in that area that are associated also with the previous use, like being able to park on the street and so on like that. It's not perfect, but it's there.
The microwave's finished. Councillor Cusack. Thank you, Councillor Cusack. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? I'll put down all those against. Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek. All those for, Councillor Serace, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Gucci, sorry, and Councillor Lawrence. Thank you.
He was trying to get the double barrel out.
Yeah, he threw me off there a little bit. Councillors, next report is 9.2 on today's agenda and is on page 32 and relates to a planning application at 5 Wallace Crescent, Strathmore. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got an alternate motion.
Yep.
That Council, with respect to an application for review against Council's refusal to grant a planning permit, resolves to advise the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, VCAT, and other parties to the application that it does not support the modifications shown on the amended plans contained within Appendix D, and that it continues to oppose the proposal on the same grounds circulated on 27 September 2017.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Gauchi-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes. It's really weird to sit down. So the grounds, just to cover off, were the bulk scale form and layout of the proposal fails to meet the objectives and strategies contained within clause 21.06 built environment of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, resulting in development that does not appropriately respond to the opportunities and constraints of this site as well as the surrounding context. 2, the proposal fails to comply with the following provisions of clause 55 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, clause 55.021 neighbourhood character, clause 55.022 residential policy, clause 55.038 site coverage. The proposal fails to provide adequate on-site car parking as required by clause 52.06 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and the proposal represents an overdevelopment of the site. The last of these is probably, that's okay, I know they're not there. That's what the referred to on clause D's. So the same reasons. So the same reasons particularly relate to the overdevelopment of the site. The amended proposal reduces the number of townhouses by 1. However, the key concern here is there's a laneway that sits in the middle, and one side of it is a growth zone mixed use, and the other side is residential. This proposal is relatively nice to look at, but tries to achieve what is on the other side of the laneway in a mixed use zone in the residential zone, and it's just an overdevelopment of the site. Certainly in terms of the consultation meeting we had with the residents and in terms of when I've been out on site, the opportunities on that site to use the laneway no one doubts, but in terms of the ability to sustain that number of townhouses on the site in a residential zone, it doesn't meet the requirements we need it to. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to support this recommendation for refusal. I've got a few sticking points with this proposal in front of us. The big one for me is, as Councillor Gauchi-Marucci said, the adjacent blocks to the left of this development are in the mixed-use zone, whereas this house, which is the first the first house along the block in Wallace Crescent, is in the residential zone. I always get concerned when these zones tend to, or are flagged to be muddied, if you like, because there are boundaries there for a reason. Wallace Crescent is really a cul-de-sac. It's a very small street surrounded by very small streets on the side of Pascoe Road, which is, where the higher density developments will occur. So to see a 649 square metre block be potentially developed, originally 6, now down to 5, when this Res Code site coverage only allows for 60% and this proposal is sitting at 76.7. I do have grave concerns about the fact that this development will become an imposition, if you like, on the residential streetscape and the residential zone that is Wallace Crescent and the street behind, which off the top of my head is Talbot Road. So that, along with the fact that it's just a complete change from the neighbourhood character that is in Wallace Crescent, I would like to just see a much less, if the development has to happen, I would just like to see a much less intensive development, because the way it is at the moment, it's just too much of an imposition in the residential zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I seek to endorse the refusal here, and only to add that certainly the bulk and the scale of this development on such a small block, although it is a fairly attractive building, I've spoken at length to the architect, and they went to a great deal of length to make it appealing to the eye from street level. It does, however, overstep the mark where bulk and size is concerned, and it on that point of view, it's inappropriately and it just inappropriately responds to opportunities and the constraints of the site itself. So it is a small site. It's surrounded by considerable amount of apartments to the Pascoe Vale side of the block, and they're also within close proximity of this laneway, which is quite small, between already existing developments and the proposed development, and the potential shadowing effect, talking with the neighbours in that area, is going to be a worry in itself. Added to that, the parking issues that go on in this area are never getting any better, and this is only going to exacerbate them even more. And I note in the officer's report that parking is an issue that they're concerned about as well. So, having said all that, and without repeating what my fellow ward councillors have already said, there are issues at hand here, and I certainly support the refusal. Thank you.
Would any other councillor Nation?
Just briefly, Mayor, in regards to this application, I think it's important to look at that initial DAP assessment that Councillor Gauch-Marici raised in her initial address, and to review the application to see if it appeases those refusal grounds. The report articulates it does, but when you look at why it was initially refused, site coverage was used in the initial DAP assessment, and that only goes down from 78 to 76. Car parking, it still doesn't adhere to the requirements. Neighbourhood character, there is the removal of one, but it would still be considered probably out of context for that neighbourhood. Given the site coverage, the initial refusal grounds was 0.4, an overdevelopment of the site. I would still think that it is. And the very initial refusal point at DAP was the bulk scale and form and layout. And when measuring this particular amended plan or amended application against that was refused by DAP, I don't think it has changed enough, and it would still fail to meet, it still does fail to meet a lot of those grounds for refusal. Had it come as an initial application, then I guess you could review some of the other areas to see if the artistic design or the architectural elements make up for some of that. But given the initial DAP refusal, I just can't see how these amended plans fail or actually meet any of those initial refusal grounds, particularly those relating to the planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor? Councillor Gauch-Marici, would you like to close?
Just briefly, just to pick up on Councillor Sharp's point, it's a reduction from 7 to 6 townhouses, and good pick up. But just to, I guess, reiterate the comments that have been made, it is a lovely architectural piece of work that would not be out of place somewhere else. It just doesn't fit the context of this site being a very, very small suburban side street. If it was on Pascoe Vale Road, if it was on a busier main road, it would be a very different conversation we would be having right now. But unfortunately, this is the site that people have decided to work with, and it needs to respond to the area. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 9.3 on tonight's agenda is on page 38, is entitled Information Privacy Policy Review 2007. Councillors, do I have a mover? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Briefly, just to say that obviously, as the report indicates, this is a review of Council's information privacy policy, and it is obviously very important that we continue to review policies such as this to make sure that they reflect both current law and current best practice. The report indicates that there have just been some minor amendments to the policy as a consequence of the review, and they are just mainly to reflect our own internal reorganisation and also the listing of the information and health privacy principles. Privacy is one of those things that for the most part you hear very little, or you want to hear very little about it, but the consequences for getting it wrong can be horrendous, and I think it's really valuable and important that we do continue to review the policy regularly, and I certainly support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, there's really nothing very much to say. This is a sensible, obvious motion that the council needs to put in place to make sure that it's is able to react effectively and efficiently when questions of privacy come up, and that we do so in a way that is aligned obviously with law, but also with good common sense as well. And I can only commend the motion and thank Councillor Marshall for covering off all the main points.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor would like to speak? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close the debate? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.4 on tonight's agenda is on page 50 and is entitled Learning from Ararat and Goldfields Inspectorate Review. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauci-Marucci.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, please.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Marshall. Councillor Gauci-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
All very briefly, sitting on the audit committee for the first time this year, these are obviously issues we have covered extensively, but the reports are very thorough and comprehensive and really reminds us as a council the importance of good governance and the key learnings for us primarily, but also it's a really great opportunity for us to consider the controls and strategies and policies and procedures that we have in place, and to review any that we're not 100% on, but to recognise that we do an incredibly good job and that we are in a really great position compared to some other councils. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Gauci-Marucci. Councillor Marshall.
The easiest thing in the world for officers to do in situations like this is to send us an email and say, here's a link to the reports, go ahead and read. So I am really pleased that they have taken the time to go through the reports in significant detail and present them to us in a way which really enables councillors, if they don't want to read the whole reports, to have a clear understanding of what went wrong in these two councils. It's always really important whenever the inspectorate releases reports such as these to reflect on the own practices that you have at your council, and to be mindful that even if you're pretty happy with them, that there is always room for improvement. And I know that that's what we do as a council, continue to look at our governance practices and see what we can do to make sure that they are best practice in the state. And while I certainly do note that the recommendation and the motion is that we note the findings, these reports should be compulsory reading for all councillors and all officers, and serve as both informative in relation to the things that you should and shouldn't do, and also as cautionary tales for how things can go wrong.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
Just a reflection, Mayor. A comment was made in the audit committee that having these reports come through as they did is like having a free consultant's report that our council can look to and understand. And in an environment where council works, which is often very, very dynamic, it's easy to get lost in the gee whiz notion of what's going on. State government has been through legislation setting the bar very high in respect of governance and codes of conduct and the likes of that, and how councils need to operate, not just council laws, but the council in general. And both of these reports provide a good opportunity to reflect, which is exactly what Councillor Marshall has said, and to be able to think a little bit about our own performance, but B, also to pick up on what are those measures and future things that can be put in place so we can keep in front of the game. One area that sort of continually strikes me as an important issue is that we're moving into a more digital age. We're moving into an age where new ways of doing business are coming up over and over and over. The demands on council in the future in that space is not just about how you pay your rates over the internet, it's more about how you do real genuine business and the likes of that. So these kinds of reports and what might be in the future are all important in terms of how we take our governance seriously and not just react but become proactive in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? Councillor Thrace.
Thank you, Mayor. In relation to this, I think that being politicians and representatives of the community ourselves, I think it's vitally important that we are kept up to date, and these findings that came out were a good wake-up call for us to investigate and to have a look at how we're travelling at the City of Moonee Valley. And it's good to note that we are ticking the boxes in the right places. It's also good to know that we are improving our governance and that we're learning from the failings of other councils that have taken place, and certainly we're travelling in a great space at Moonee Valley. So it was good to read this report, and good to know that we've got some fantastic direction from our CEO and directors that are guiding us in the right way too. Thank you.
Any other councillor? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only to say that if we look to our current federal government and the issues of governance, particularly where same dual citizenship is concerned, then wake-up calls such as that are only too true. And it's, as Councillor Sarras pointed out, we do have excellent governance in this city, and we have to maintain that. And it's a credit to our CEO and his fellow leaders. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Garrett-Marucci, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next report on tonight's agenda is on 9.5 and it's on page 53 and is entitled Financial Performance Report September 2017. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I move the officer's report, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Burt. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just the financial report, performance report, September 2017, FOL 17-11, and the recommendation being that we receive and note the financial performance report for the period 1st of July 2017 to 30th September 2017, and point 2, receive and note the grants register status report for September 2017, and point 3, receive and note the quarterly council expense report for 1st of July 2017 to 30th September 2017.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you.
Councillor Byrne, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, first time spoken tonight. One thing that I did want to highlight was the annual budget is a surplus of 10.5 million. The annual forecast surplus is 6.7 million, a decrease of 3.8 mil. This reduction predominantly relates to the unsuccessful grant funding application for the shared facilities funding program, which had been budgeted as of revenue. So just a reminder for everyone, that was a few applications that we put in jointly with the state government, which included some soccer pitches up our way and also, of course, the lighting at Aberfeldy for the netball courts, which bitterly disappointed, but I think that it is a reminder call that we haven't spent a lot of money on women's sport as a whole as Moonee Valley Council when you look back in history, and we can't always be relying on other forms of government to come through with the goods. So we need to be sometimes putting our money where our mouth is and funding it ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any other council nation?
Thank you, Mayor. The grants register is a bit like a traffic light. You definitely like to see those green blocks, and you can see that we've been successful receiving funding on a number of different state and federal body grants. And as Councillor Byrne mentioned, the Victorian School Building Authority Shared Facilities Fund, to have them as red and for those grants to be unsuccessful is somewhat disappointing, but I don't think it's the complete end to that concept. We often discuss the lack of open space and sporting grounds in our municipality, and I think that while these grants have not been successful, hopefully they do start some dialogue with the schools about how we can either co-invest or open up the grounds for our sporting clubs after hours. And when you think of the number of schools throughout a municipality that are predominantly just used 8 till 4 or 8 till 5, there is an opportunity there. So while the grants were not successful, hopefully it initiates a bit of discussion at an officer at a council level about how we can still look at those opportunities and work with schools to create more open space and more sporting or recreational opportunities for all our residents.
Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Only just to add that, and to reiterate what Councillor Byrne mentioned in relation to the annual budget being in surplus, not to the degree that we thought it was, but of course less revenue is also less expenditure, so things balance out in relation to those figures. The capital works annual forecast of 27.5 million is 8.3% less than the adopted budget of 35.9. Now this is due to building works to be carried over in 2018-19 for Overland Reserve Pavilion, Boeing Reserve Pavilion and East Keilor Leisure Centre, as we're all looking forward to that. Overall, the key financial indicators also indicated in that report. I note in section 6 that 6 of the 7 measures classify Moonee Valley as low risk. So that's a good feather in the city's cap, and one that we want to hang on to. Poor financial management is just that, poor financial management, and it's not viewed very well in the municipality of any city, but we want to keep our risk to a minimum, and that needs to be kept an eye on, and I'm sure our CEO and David, the financial manager, are doing just that. So overall, I think the council is considered a low risk, and its financial sustainability is terrific going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.6 on tonight's agenda is on page 76 and is entitled Buckley Street Level Crossing Removal Project. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Sorry, Mayor, before we... Yep.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to advise that I will not be participating in any discussion or voting in relation to this item for reasons disclosed at a prior meeting.
By all means. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the Council defer consideration of this report to the 12th of December 2017 Ordinary Council meeting to allow councillors to receive further advice and information on its options.
Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I might stand if I may, because on this issue I get a bit worked up, and we want to make sure we control ourselves. In my opinion, this report is overly conciliatory and fails to address totally the overall impacts of the community of Moonee Ponds and Essendon of this road under rail proposal. It fails on several fronts because it does not address the following. Overall traffic movement through the back streets of Moonee Ponds and Essendon. It looks at only the Shamrock Street and a few of the other streets, but the impact of traffic in and around schools, including Penley and Park Street, Lowther Hall in Leslie Road, St Columba's in Leslie Road, St Teresa's in Edward Street, Essendon, and Essendon Grammar and Essendon Primary School in Raleigh Street, Essendon, on the eastern side of the railway line, are not even considered in this report. It fails to address the local community concerns in Essendon and Moonee Ponds. It does not give any further details in relation to the design outcomes or impacts of this trench that is intended to go down the middle of Buckley Street. The report fails to address the real safety concerns of the elderly, the school children and the disabled. The report calls for transparency for the state Labor government proposal, and yet fails to convey that the fact when making its recommendation that there is no transparency.
Councillor Lawrence, I'll just give you a bit of leeway, but could you please speak to the deferral first, please?
Thank you. I'd like to ensure that all councillors receive full and frank and comprehensive information in relation to the report, and at this stage I don't feel that the councillors have all that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sharp.
Just quickly, I'm happy to support the deferral. I believe there's more questions than there are answers, so certainly happy to see that further report in December. Thank you.
Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. I will hesitantly support the deferral, although note that the last time this matter came before us was July, 4 months ago, and therefore we should be in a position to be able to consider a report and its merits and move a subsequent either motion in agreement or in disagreement or an alternative. It concerns me that we are not in that position, and Councillor Lawrence has indicated that he believes there's a lack of information provided in the report, and if it is an update for the community, then we need to ensure that the information is being communicated to the community. We have an advocacy plan. We've engaged in independent consultants to do a great detail of work, and have engaged and received legal advice. And it frustrates me as a representative of our community that we sit here 4 months later and we have to, as councillors, defer this item due to a lack of information. If we're deferring it due to a lack of information, then our community probably even have a greater lack of information, and I do find that extremely concerning. So I will hesitantly support the deferral, but there are people out there that want answers, that want information, and time is of the essence. We need to ensure that they are well enough informed. So hopefully this will come back before us at the 28th of November, but otherwise at the 12th of December we need a comprehensive report, and we need to let the community know what we are doing and what we are not doing, if that is the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gauci.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to Councillor Nation, I very hesitantly support a deferral. Obviously, as we've highlighted, the update that's been provided doesn't address many of the key concerns raised, and the actions agreed to date which I think is one of the really important things for me. Just for clarity, some of those that we committed to on the 23rd of May, we committed to urgently prepare a comprehensive impact assessment and advocacy plan. And the outcomes that we sought in that advocacy plan included seeking the best solution for Buckley Street, seeking a corridor solution, exploring all available options to ensure the best solution for Buckley Street, and ensuring construction impacts are minimised. On the 13th of June, the consultants were committed to undertake an impact assessment of the road under proposal, including costs and benefits, to prepare a corridor impact assessment and produce development concepts for the car park sites. And the 25th of July, that we agreed that if the project is not referred to the Standing Advisory Committee, Council requests government defer Buckley Street level crossing removal project until such time as all relevant matters, including traffic and transport and the future of car parking sites and future level crossing removal options, have been independently and transparently considered. So obviously from our point of view, there's a lot of those things that aren't sufficiently addressed in the report and that we want that information on. Particularly for me, it's been 5 months since we urgently endorsed some consultants, and we're still yet to see that report or full impact assessment, which is exactly what we would have expected to see come with this report. And more than that, the information that's available to us, to the community, to the public is still really sparse and incomplete. So I really want for us to be able to provide a full picture for councillors, for the community, for everyone involved of exactly what has happened to date, not necessarily confidentially, but everything else that we can, to say here's what's been done, here's what hasn't, here's what the LXRA has done, here's what they haven't done, and here's all of the timelines. Here's the advocacy items that we've sought, and here's what we've done on every single one of those. So for me, as much as I am frustrated it's taking us another month to bring this issue back to the table, I want to make sure we do it in a really thorough and comprehensive way.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Serace.
Thank you. I endorse what my fellow councillors have said here with regards to this issue, and we all know how hard we've advocated as best we can on behalf of the community. But I think that deferring it till the 12th of December, whilst I'm also hesitant to do that, will be the way to go about this and getting all of those questions answered. And let us hope that we don't endure the frustration that our community and we have endured with LXRA without having any of these questions answered, together with the Minister for Planning. So I support the deferral for those reasons. I certainly endorse what Councillor Gauci-Marigi has said in regards to certain issues, and whilst this council has been transparent through this issue and for the last 5 years have always advocated that we would prefer and advocate for a rail underroad solution, let us hope that we get the answers that we're seeking in order for a true and proper proposal to be put on the table for the future livability of our community.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Councillor Cusack.
Well, I'm a councillor who doesn't support the council's majority decision to go with the rail under road. However, if I'm going to continue to work to support getting the best outcome for council when government comes to a decision about how it's going to spend its money, I'm more than happy to seek to follow this deferment, because whether it is a decision of council laws who favour a particular process or other process, we all require an amount of information that has to come through. As Councillor Gauci-Marigi has just pointed out, there are a number of areas where we're still somewhat grey in respect of our advocacy plan. And my concern has always been that we've basically put all our eggs in one basket, and there needs to be another opportunity to think in another way around this, but that will be a decision that comes up at some other date.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak?
Sorry, Mayor. A point of clarification. With a deferral motion, does this report come back to us in its exact form?
Councillor Officer Natalie.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Officers will present the original report with an addendum report addressing a whole range of issues that councillors have made clear they would like addressed and brought forward to the public.
Sorry, just one more point of clarification, Mayor. Would that also review the so-called confidential elements of this report which were not available to the public to view? Sorry, through the chair. I know I'm talking to you, Ms. Reader, but through the chair. Does that also include reviewing what parts of this report are confidential? Because I'm of the view that there is plenty in the appendix that would not be considered confidential under the Local Government Act.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, our officers will review that and redact or indeed remove any issues of confidentiality and then make the balance public.
Thank you. I'd just like to say a few words as well. This item has been a hotly debated topic, and as much as the community and us as council and council officers, we've all been frustrated with actually the lack of information coming to us as well. So if this report looks a little bit scarce and a little bit light on, it's not because we haven't tried hard, our officers haven't tried hard. I think it's just a little bit of lack of information coming towards us as well. So Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close and would you like some extended time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I just get clarification? Can I speak to the report? Yes, thank you. Okay, I'll remain seated since... Yeah.
To the deferral. Can I vote on the report? Speak to the deferral.
Just speak to the deferral. I cannot refer to the report.
Councillor Lawrence, if you could direct your comments to the reasons relating to the proposal to defer, as other councillors have done in passing. They have made comments on some of the content in the report,
yes.
But if you could make sure that it's focused on that be the reasons for you proposing to defer.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The report does state that, and I quote, as the road under outcome will result in a significant change to the traffic movement in and around the Buckley Street crossing. Additional service roads, signalisation, on-street parking, local street directional movements and changes to bus movements will be required. And the next line in the report states, while these matters have yet to be fully resolved. Now, I refer back to the report because, it's not conclusive what the outcomes of the report are going to be, and therefore our decision as a council and councillors, if the report isn't conclusive, then how do we come up with a conclusive answer to the questions that the residents and ratepayers of Essendon and Moonee Ponds particularly are going to be asking? And that's why I want this deferred, because we haven't got the answers in the report. We don't have conclusive evidence as to which direction even the report is stating, and therefore we need conclusive, transparent information, and be that from LXRA or from whoever, be it independent reports. We haven't seen that information yet from an independent report that is coming to us, I'm sure. And so all of this compounds itself into issues that councillors, for justifiable reasons, need information to make sensible decisions. And we don't have that information, and this report does not provide it. So, as I say, we need another more complete report that covers all aspects of this level crossing removal, including a complete and independent report on train under road, as has always been council's position, and I'm currently of no different view that is still council's position, and it is the plan that we have advocated for from not just this council but previous councils and previous councillors, and it's the plan for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carry unanimously. Council Report 9.7 on tonight's agenda is on page 82 and is entitled North Essendon Local Area Traffic Management Study. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gauchi-Marucci.
I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Gauchi-Marucci, would you like to speak to the item?
Just briefly, obviously was involved in a number of the meetings relating to this LATM. It's my first LATM, including bus tours of the area, and it certainly addresses a number of concerns that have been raised, including parking around schools and speed limits. I note that there are still some questions around some of the speed mitigation measures that will come back before council once the speed limits have been introduced. They will come back again for review. And importantly, the one I raised in one of my very first council meetings that is still in there is the fact that you are not allowed to do a U-turn onto your road, and there will now be signage to support that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I sat in on a number of these LATM group meetings also, and there was certainly a lot of impact from residents and business owners, which was really good to see. I did have a concern about the extension of the 40-kilometre speed limit on Keilor Road past where it is currently finishes down near what's the street? Grave Street. Anyway, where it finishes now, this proposal is supports extending it. I do sit on the public transport providers group, and a lot of the tram operators and bus operators do have concerns with that, but I understand that it is up to Vic Roads to let us know whether they support that. So I guess we could just wait to see. There was support from the LATM working group, so happy to see how that pans out. But all in all, I think this LATM will be a huge benefit to residents and business owners in that little pocket of North Essendon. So I look forward to seeing the plan rolled out. Thank you.
Any other Councillor Lawrence?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I endorse most of the information in the LATM report, and having read it thoroughly and done the shall we call it the Cook's tour of North Essendon with the other ward council, or some of the ward councillors and previous mayor. The only issue I have concern about is on it's point J on the map of the area, and I'm not sure how this ultimately will get, whether an amendment can be made or not, but it relates to inform the consultation additional traffic management devices would be considered in the following streets. Well, it doesn't actually specify what these traffic management devices are, and it does just actually mention the streets Cowper, Dudley, Duffy, Kerford, O'Shanassy, Prince, Renown, Ross, Salisbury, and on each of those streets it talks about one location, 3 locations, 2 locations. Again, no detail as to what it's actually referring to, and either that can be clarified in the follow-up endorsement, or J can be removed altogether. I'm not moving an amendment at this point because I think it is a secondary item in terms of the speed limits in the area being reduced to 40. I think they're currently at 50 in the residential streets around there. However, certainly some clarification would need to be given, and I'm sure the residents in the area would like to know if they're going to cop speed humps at the multitude of number that they're suggesting. I'm not suggesting they are speed humps, but could be speed humps, because there's no clarification in the report, of course. But if they are, and potentially they are, then we would like a clarification, and I certainly have had quite a few residents in that part of North Essendon that would not be in favour of them. My personal feelings on speed humps I think is well known, so I won't go into that, but there has been considerable discussion with officers and other members of the residents in that area in relation to that. There are some speed humps there already, as those that have gone around the area already seen, and quite a few roundabouts. But there's very few streets that you can literally get over 70 kilometres an hour without having to stop, because the streets are quite short, and even the main Long Street, Kerford Street, has I think 4 or 5 speed humps or roundabouts in it already. So, and Royal Avenue, the other longer stretch of road in that area, also has I think 5 speed humps already as well. So there just seems a little bit of overkill if we're going to fill the area with so many speed humps that people can't travel 10 metres without having to go over a hump. And there's been considerable research done by am I out of time? Could I ask for a quick extension?
A little bit of leeway.
Very, very quick extension. Speed humps have been known to cause back complaints. They increase the greenhouse gases in society. They increase acceleration, deceleration noise to those that happen to be unfortunate enough to live in front of them, and they affect the suspension and muffler system on the under berth of most vehicles. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence. Any other Councillor Sorais?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As Council's traffic and transport portfolio holder, I also went on that little merry bus tour of the North Essendon precinct. And whilst we're not always going to make everybody happy and please everybody, probably the Bowls Club and community facility groups with parking and traffic changes, I can clearly recall some of those metal barriers that are going to be replaced that were quite an eyesore and quite dangerous actually, so they needed reviewing, and that's been taken care of in this report. With regards to U-turns, well, legally you cannot do a U-turn over a single line on any roads. There's a little bit of information that you can pop into your ridiculous book. But in relation to the report itself, it's great to see that Council are taking on board measures for the safety and parking, etc., for our community in consultation with them. So it's great to see it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just like Councillor Sharp, I too had concerns about the 40-kilometre zone down Keilor Road. Extending it further down Keilor Road. However, in light of my PAC group, which is leisure and active communities, and which a lot of bike riders are a part of, one thing that's been brought up multiple times is we need to be able to get from one end of the municipality to the other end of the municipality safely, and a lot of people do that via bike down Keilor Road, and it's not really safe at 60 kilometres an hour down that section. And by lowering the speed, the impact for bike riders is quite high. And if we can get more people out of their cars and onto their bikes because they think it's a safer option, then that's a good outcome. It will also potentially stop so many people taking shortcuts and commuting down Keilor Road, maybe staying on the freeway an extra stop longer, and just reducing some of the traffic because they won't want to put up with the 40-kilometre speed limits. So we've got to look at the positives there. But if we can create a safer environment, it's only going to take an extra couple of minutes, then I think that we should go for it. And I do want to say thank you to all the officers and the councillors that spent lots of time on this study, because it's very comprehensive for anyone who's read through all of the pages. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Cusack.
Let me say right at the outset that I'm happy to support the motion as it stands. So I'm not talking against this, and although I do support the notion of 40-kilometre speed limits in Keilor Road as proposed. I only have to reflect on the death of the cyclist yesterday in Northcote, and a very close friend of mine, his daughter, who's 13 years of age, is struggling now with her life in the Kiddies Hospital. and he's a local resident of Moonee Valley too, so that family were devastated by that action. However, I want to make some general comments about LATAMS, and I look at this one and I see how long it's run for, and I see how wonderfully committed the community has been in responding to all of the bits and pieces. I'm very impressed, of course, by the effort that has been put in by council in allocating funds for all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, the LATAM process is still about chasing our tails, and they're not about necessarily being solution focused. And somewhere along the line, folks, we need to sit down and have a serious think, and I suppose it's that connection in my mind between the transport world and what happens in planning, and thinking about what are our suburbs really going to look like and what should we be doing in them for the future. LATAMS invariably find solutions for short-term solutions for some car movement and some parking, and then in 2 years' time you're back spending another 200 grand to try and rejig some of the, or tweak some of the bits and pieces around it. Now, of course, that kind of work always has to go on, and you do have to respond to things. I'm not sort of that blind to it. But in a sense, we are putting in a lot of effort around LATAMS. I'd like to see something happen that talks about how a LATAM exercise changes the structure of our neighbourhoods, so that neighbourhoods become alternative transport friendly, so that you get things like a free flow of cars in certain places, but you promote the walking and alternative transport modes, whether they be public transport or cycling or whatever like that in other places, and to do that in a logical and connected up way. And LATAMS should give us that sort of information, as well as not just be reactive but turn them into a proactive thing. I'd like to see council take that up as an opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Gouthridge, would like to close?
I will, thank you, very briefly. Just to respond to a few points that have been raised, I guess. In terms of how we plan our neighbourhood strategically, including issues around transport, I would think that feeding that through the current Moonee Valley 2040 process would be a fantastic way to add some of those comments. Feedback is open until the end of next month, the 22nd, so you could easily put some of those things through. Nudge, nudge, push, push. Moonee Valley 2040, if you Google it, an MVCC, it'll come up. In terms of the item J around the traffic management, I note the conversation around death by consultation, but just wanted to reinforce that the report says that it will consider the installation of additional traffic management devices in the study area, subject to a review of the area-wide 40-kilometre speed zone and further consultation. So I'm sure all of those kinks can be ironed out quickly or slowly, as is the consultation process. Just to respond to the comment about U-turns, I've never done an illegal U-turn, but a sign would be lovely so that I can say to my husband, I was right, it's illegal. It will help win an argument. And finally, the committee involved in the LATAM have given up many evenings of their time, as well as the officers involved. So I think it's really important to recognise their time and commitment to this process and just to thank them. And I'm sure they look forward to all these changes being implemented. So thank you.
Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.8 on tonight's agenda is on page 110 and is entitled Progress Report of Portfolio Advisory Committees. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, just move the officer's report.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Just the executive summary. I think it's all pretty explanatory, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cusack.
Well, yes, it is a very straightforward report, and there's and it's there for the reading. what's really important about this, and what people in our community need to be aware of, is that the vital role that our portfolio advisory committees are now playing within council. For a long, long time, council has had a loose weave of information gathering through the community, but now we've actually got something that is structured. It is, and hopefully it will grow and become much more rigorous and vigorous in terms of its input into council planning and so on. The advisory committee that I sit in has voluntarily agreed to an additional meeting in this half, and in fact had it last night, so that they could consider issues coming out of the recent symposium held about 2040. And I think that there's an energy that I'm understanding from all of our portfolio advisory committees that is really, really positive. I'm getting good vibes around that, and it's not just obviously within my area of interest. The next bit for all of us is to keep an eye on this, to ensure that there is this meshing and interfolding of what we're learning, so that we actually grow each of the committees so that their own expertise is developed by other people's input. And so our whole community hopefully can benefit that way. Because while we're talking about 2040 and a lot of this sort of stuff, it really is about informing, at the end of the day, what might be those very, very important activities or capital works and so on like that in all of our neighbourhoods that need to be got up and got done, so that we stay with a livable city that has got great amenity and responds to a future age.
Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very much speaking in support of the motion. For me, my 2 packs have been incredibly useful, and I looked around the table at both of them and thought, if council was actually paying the consultant fees for the level of expertise sitting around these tables, it would be a very, very expensive bill. So I certainly think that is a great model. The part where it will succeed or fail is in what we do with the outcomes of the PAC meetings and the information and the recommendations that actually come out of those particular groups. And that, given it is a new model, is the challenge for council, because obviously you don't want these very engaged, intelligent and interested people who have a lot of value to provide to feel that they are spending their time and essentially not making a difference. So certainly I think all signs are really pointing in a very positive direction to date, and I think that these packs are going to provide an enormous amount of value in policy input, in driving issues too that we otherwise wouldn't identify, and hopefully enable us to be at the front of some of the thinking on some of these really important issues.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Shiraz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As Portfolio Advisory Committee being integrated transport, and all of the committees that we have through the City of Moonee Valley, I'd just like to sort of put out a thank you to those people who did put their hand up, to got onto these committees, who take an interest and who represent the whole community in different areas and different spaces. And hopefully that maybe not sort of take this as far as the Moonee Valley 2040, because we need to look at here and now, what we're implementing, what we're doing and the actions we take now out of these portfolio committees. And I think that that's important, that we get to the stage where, as we've got a report here tonight, that they're all merging into one, they come in under one report, that we've got the background and the feedback from all of those committees for all of us to be aware of and the community to read about. So once they all form part of an integrated outcome, I think that it'll be a positive thing for the community at large.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm lucky enough to chair the Leisure and Active Communities Portfolio Group, and being the Deputy Chair for the MV 2040, I was able to step in for that one, and the enthusiasm that was shown by the people on their groups was absolutely amazing. a bit more just about the Leisure and Active Advisory Committee, because it's obviously my little baby. Well, I've got one of them at home, but this is another passion of mine. So we're looking a lot in terms of how we can make Moonee Valley, the long-term strategic vision to make things, the leisure and active side of Moonee Valley, top-notch. So people want to come to Moonee Valley and they know that they've got options. Things that we've looked at include netball courts, electronic bikes, maps of trails on a phone app, accessible and public charging points run by solar energy, community spaces in new developments, more multi-use sports grounds, livable streetscapes and libraries with open space. And some of the priorities that the committee have discussed include a cycling strategy, which I touched on before, lighting and safety, Queen's Park Master Plan, the open space strategy, playground strategy, and of course, one of our favourites up in Rose Hill Ward, the East Keilor Leisure Centre, which is coming, which we're obviously are going to be updating the community on shortly. But I just want to say, by reading through all the minutes, it's absolutely outstanding, some of the work that's already been done, and I just can't wait to watch it unfold over the next little while.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Building off what has already been said around the chamber, I think obviously these packs are a great initiative to engage so many respected and knowledgeable people throughout our community from a range of different backgrounds to provide such an invaluable support to us as a council and us as councillors. I think where they will stand up or fail is our ability to take that information from our packs and discuss with each other what is being discussed at a pack level, because there is so much overlap between many of our portfolios that our ability to relay our own pack's information back to items on the council agenda, to strategies, to policies, to MV 2040 is really important. So it's crucial that input by each individual that forms part of our pack is not lost at a council law level. And I know obviously my pack, Access, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, although they do want the name changed because they want the acronym to spell IDEA, because they believe they're full of ideas, which I think is fantastic. We just went alphabetically, but that was one of, it was a good idea, wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. But obviously our pack overlaps so many other areas of council, and we've got such an educated and experienced group of people who are from a range of different, as I said, a range of different backgrounds. So I think for us as councillors, it's really important we engage with one another, we discuss what is being discussed within our pack. We're aware of what's being discussed in other people's packs, and that we bring that information to council, because it'll be for the betterment of us to create policy, but also be for the betterment of our broader community, and that's the core reason of establishing these packs in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Couch-Marucci.
Thank you. I won't recover what almost everyone else has around the awesome enthusiasm and involvement of energy within their committees. And obviously we've touched heavily on the 2040 symposium that was held. I just wanted to provide a really brief note, just that the 2040 PAC committee is not included in the recommendations at this stage, just because they are still to be finalised and will be circulated at a later date. That was it.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. Just quickly, I'd like to thank all members of my Lifelong Learning Portfolio Advisory Committee. We've certainly had a great first meeting, not the introduction, but the first meeting where we actually sat down to have a chat about all things to do with learning. The night did concentrate quite a lot on libraries and what they may look like in 2040, and a number of the members said that or had ideas that there's certainly much more to learning other than libraries. Like, you can gain so much more information from places other than libraries. So that's what we're going to focus on at our next meeting next year. And I certainly look forward to all the ideas that are coming out of my portfolio. As I said, there's a wide range of backgrounds, and they all have their own ideas, and it's been quite just great to see everybody interacting and enjoying it. So the main thing is enjoying it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just noted a small oversight, and that is that the Strategic Planning Pack has not actually approved its terms of reference yet. So I would ask the mover if we can delete item F in relation to that, and the seconder.
I don't have a problem with that, Mr Mayor.
No problems? Councillor Sharp. No problems with that? Yeah.
I thought it was Councillor Cusack.
I've got Councillor Sharp here. Oh, Councillor Cusack. You lied to me.
I've already nodded.
Okay.
Sorry, Mayor.
No
Thank you.
problems.
Apologies.
Okay, that's fine. Councillor Lawrence would like to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Reflecting on the pack that I look after, the business promotions portfolio, I freely admit that I had my misgivings about these packs to begin with, and particularly my own, and thinking that it might just turn into a bit of a talk fest and not go anywhere. And I did share that with Kendria Pope to begin with. However, I take it all back, because the meeting, we've only had one meeting, and I do believe we're continuing with the same portfolios into the next year, and I would hope so, because one meeting doesn't really give us much chance to establish things going, but I guess that's to be decided at a later date. However, the business promotions portfolio has been a real revelation, and the different areas that we've discussed, and I won't go through the full report, but the thing that has jumped out at me was the Wi-Fi in shopping precincts that was coming back from all of the business people that are on the committee, and a few statistics that they threw at me, and it was quite surprising that what does it offer to local businesses, and they thought it builds a competitive edge in the shopping strips and areas. It gives social Wi-Fi, make it possible for customer information to get around to everybody, and connects them to Wi-Fi in the shopping centre if they're not already, or if they're looking for it. Allows shops to create customer databases that allows them to send out offers as you happen to be walking around. And then they said, well, hang on, High Point West has Wi-Fi, Westfield has it, and probably the other large shopping centres in and around the region do, but none of our shopping strips have any of it. So we're going backwards, and that's what they were saying to me. And I've never run a shop. I've run a business, but I've never run a shopping centre, a shop in a shopping centre. So that was an important aspect that I've taken home. The other thing that really hit home, and that was one business guy said he'd been looking for an area where he was an IT guy, employed about 15 people, but he was looking for a larger premises within the city of Moonee Valley, not a factory, but professional offices. He couldn't find it anywhere. He'd looked and looked and looked, and this is a real issue that we have in this city, that we are short of professional space for people to use, and we have to really have a hard think about it. So again, this is things that you wouldn't have known, but you're getting it direct from the horse's mouth that these are issues confronting our city and things that we have to really think as councillors, not just me, and focus on. So I take my hat off to Kendria. I apologise if I said anything that I shouldn't have, but so I think it's going to be worthwhile for all of us to go down this path, and I look forward to any other ideas, as Cam's committee is going to be called, and what we can get out of those.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is number 10, notice of motion. Councillors, the next item of business is notice of motion, and we have one notice of motion listed tonight. Therefore, I call upon Councillor Marshall to present her notice of motion.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I would like to move that Council explores options for the establishment of a community garden at or in proximity to Walter Street, Ascot Vale, and officers report back on these options to an ordinary council meeting in February 2018.
Councillors, do I have a second? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you. This is really quite a simple notice of motion in many ways, and having read the officer comments, I can't help but wonder if, in my attempt to get to the point, that perhaps there might be some misunderstanding around what was intended. So this is really just asking for a report back on how we can go about establishing a garden, the various steps that are required and the things that have to be done, and what might be some potential sites, and basically to get the ball rolling for the process for a community garden. I think we all very much understand that a community garden is just that, and it requires a level of community support. I wasn't proposing a council-run garden. This would very much be about the community in Ascot Vale, in this particular part of Ascot Vale, having access to a community garden. And again, I certainly understand that they require a level of governance, and again, this is not groundbreaking stuff. There are very well established and well-known models around how community gardens work. So I think we're all quite clear on that element of things. I note in relation to the comments about community group potentially identifying a site, and I know one of the people who are interested in this has. I suppose, again, I like efficiency, and I wondered whether it might in fact be a better use of time for officers to actually, with the knowledge that they have and the knowledge as a council that we have of Walter Street, because obviously there's a bit of history in and around there, to actually identify what might be some useful sites. And to me that would seem a bit more of an efficient process, obviously with community input, but about saying, okay, well, if you're looking at this area, these are the parts that would be no-go for, might be particular reasons why you couldn't have a particular site. But I would think that the council is pretty well equipped to be able to identify potential sites. I think most of us know the Ascot Chase Enclave area quite well. And if you're looking at an area that has an incredible community focus, you can pop yourself down there. And if you happen to be around even Halloween and you head down to the Chase, like it really is, you've got so many young families, such a great community down there. If you head down to the Auskick that's down there, to any of the great community events that happen spontaneously at times, you can see what a sense of community there really is. And even the park, the Flying Fox Park as my kids call it, is a real great gathering point, and that's for me one of the things about this part of Ascot Vale, that there very much is a community focus, and I don't doubt at all that there will be many people who would put their hands up, and I've had people approach me via Facebook, via message, and otherwise in person to say we'd love to be involved. So I think that's really important to note, as is the fact that we all know that there has been an incredible increase in density in this particular pocket of Ascot Vale, and that even with the older houses, you have often places that have very small blocks and minimal backyard space. And if we are to be genuinely committed to the idea of food security, about making sure that people know what it is to plant things, to grow things, then we need to look at these options, because some people, just by virtue of the fact that they do not have the space on their own property, will not have that opportunity. And so it might be that this particular space works a bit differently to the wonderful Avondale Heights. It might work a bit differently to the other community gardens that we have. But I think it's an incredibly good opportunity to look at it. And I really hope that we can get a report back that sets out the various things that need to be done, and we can just get the ball rolling and really develop what will be, I'm sure, a magnificent community asset.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack.
Well, I'm totally biased, of course, because I'm a community gardener, so and actively involved at the one in down at the bottom of Fenton Street in Ascot Vale. We've already got a lot of residents in the area who are putting their hands up, and there's quite a deal of excitement about the concept of creating a community garden down there. I think that kind of fulfils the very first point that the officers had made in response to your notice that you were going to raise this motion, Councillor Marshall. But the thing is that what we've got down, and Councillor Marshall's really hitting a very interesting note here, is that somewhere along the line, and I don't know how brilliant we are, and I'll just sort of put it down to some fabulous work done by great officers over time, but we actually pushed all the right buttons and got Ascot Chase right. And we also have found that is having a wonderful kick on for that whole area coming off Whiskey Hill and down on the flats towards the river. And so now, and as Councillor Marshall says, we've got a lot of young people, but community gardens by their very nature are self-sustaining, and the community takes care of them. All we're really looking for in a report here is for officers to say, here's a really handy place to go, and you can establish a community garden on any old piece of wasteland. It doesn't have to be in a perfect place. The community garden that I work at was right on the edge of the freeway. When I first started going there, the lead content in the soil was so high, it was outrageous. Well, we didn't get the council to clean that all away. Unfortunately, unleaded petrol came in around about the same time, but we got a lot of that stuff out of there ourselves, cleaned it all up ourselves, and did that. Council's just recently celebrated things like the bees thing and making our own honey. Well, a lot of community gardens are now moving into the keeping hives and all that sort of stuff and all those sorts of things. So they don't just perform a role around a recreation leisure thing in terms of the gardening side of things and all that sort of stuff, but there is an ongoing learning, community connectedness and so on, and they can be done very cheaply. And I mean, I know of an example over in St Albans where Community Corrections basically built all of the plots for all of the garden down there. It was just a negotiation between the council and Community Corrections. I mean, so there are plenty of opportunities to do it in a very low cost, low key way in this municipality. The returns are high. The returns are really high over a long period of time, and I think can only ever advantage us all. Strategically, it fits in with everything council wants and does and thinks about. It's the most common sense way to go forward. I really think so.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
I obviously, as a fellow ward councillor, will commend Councillor Marshall on this motion. And I think Councillor Marshall touched on the unique aspects of the Enclave estate. Being a new area, the majority of people that are moving in are either moving into new dwellings or dwellings which have been built within the past 5 years. So as well as there being young families in there, there are a whole diverse range of people that have moved in and might not have the connectivity of an Auskick or kids to take somewhere, which often gives that first initial bonding with the community and introduction to other members of the local area. So on top of the benefits that Councillor Cusack has raised in regards to physical and recreation for a whole range of members of our community, particularly new or establishing areas, giving new residents, particularly newer elderly residents who don't have kids or anyone without kids, that opportunity to come together, meet new people in a very easygoing, non-confronting environment, and particularly down there is a lack of back gardens, the way a lot of those dwellings have been designed. So it just ticks plenty of boxes. And Councillor Marshall, you haven't asked for the world here, you've asked for a report. And I think when that report comes back to us, then we will be able to provide direction to people who may be interested, but to not suggest that a report or the notice of motion should not be supported, given the wealth of expertise we have as a council helping develop these community gardens and the benefits it will have. I'm very happy to support your motion, Nicole.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The way I read this notice of motion and officer comments is that basically because some people haven't brought this idea to us via a petition, it's not supported. I think sometimes we really need to look outside the box, and just because we haven't got a petition or we haven't got a group of people coming and sitting in front of us asking for, something like this, a community garden to occur down in that little pocket, certainly doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, and it certainly doesn't mean that we should not investigate it. I certainly congratulate Councillor Marshall for being proactive, because I think we can all be a little bit more proactive, certainly when it comes to ideas such as this, and I look forward to getting the report on it, so I'm certainly happy to support it, and it could well be a case of build it and they will come.
Absolutely.
Any other? Councillor Marucci.
I'm somewhat shattered because that was like on my... I won't reiterate the comments around the benefits of community gardens because I think they are well established, and as has been noted, this is just asking for a report to come back. This isn't preemptively building it and they will come. I was only going to credit Carly who emailed us that quote because I thought it was brilliant. But the bit I just wanted to touch on, the success of these initiatives is rarely the council's involvement. It's the engagement and passion of the community. And the part that I was really delighted to see firsthand with the Strathmore Community Garden was the linkages between the Bendigo Community Bank, the Rotary Club. It wasn't just about the people who wanted to garden. It was about people who had no idea about gardening that became involved because their organisations were involved and held functions there. And it became, we talk about it with 2040, and I say it a million times, but we talk about community hubs. These are hubs for our community to interact and engage with each other. And I think it's brilliant, so thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Okay, so I support your motion. I do have a slight issue with the build it and they will come sort of motto, not in the way that you would think, but I do agree that if you build it, they will come. But the presidents of these clubs, if you speak to your Kevin Marshalls, your Rosemary Mackenzies, these types, the amount of hours it takes for the people who look after these gardens is quite enormous. So yes, build it and they will come, but there still needs to be the people at the top that are pushing it, looking after it, and my understanding is that there is a Facebook group and they're sort of all ready to go. It just hasn't quite happened, but there does need to be a structure in place because there are membership fees and finances and a lot of other things as opposed to just everyone coming together and finding a bit of land and planting some things. But in saying that, I went down to the East Keilor Sustainability Garden in Tupple Place in East Keilor. They had their open day a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a magnificent day. There was, I would say, a couple of hundred people, maybe 300 people sort of coming and going. People were selling I had pickled tomatoes, lemon butter and olives. Of course, olives up in East Keilor. And it was just a really great thing that catered for everyone from little kids that had their plots right up to the elderly citizens. So it does capture a really broad range of people. And as long as there's the real movers and shakers behind the scenes that are willing to do the hard work, because it is, it is work, then I think that it's a great idea. And as other people have said, it is only a report back to council, so it'll be interesting to see, and I look forward to it getting off the ground.
I just wanted to say just a few words as well, Councillor Marshall. I've been involved with the East Keilor Sustainability Group too there, and I've got a European background, but what's really good about this group is you actually learn some stuff out of them, like some old grandma's recipes, on how to make lemon butter and and that kind of stuff is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. And I think if their group does happen down at Walter Street, I think they'll have a pretty similar kind of experience down there. So, Councillor, would you like to close?
Thank you very much, councillors, for your supportive comments. They are very much appreciated, and I'm appreciative too that you saw what my intent was. And I think you've touched on so many really important points about that ability for intergenerational mixing and that sharing of knowledge. In this part of Ascot Vale too, there are so many people who are really committed to sustainable living, and whether it be through waste reduction or the importance of growing vegetables, the importance of having a small carbon footprint themselves. So I think that this is very much an area for a whole range of reasons, because you do have still many people from European backgrounds who I'm sure would love to get down there, perhaps with their grandkids and get a plot. And then you do have every single generation. I can think of examples of people who would be interested and who have shown interest in being involved. So certainly look forward to a report back and then really getting the ball rolling.
Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item of business is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business? No? I'll move to the next report. Confidential reports. The next item of business is confidential reports. And councillors, we have 2 confidential reports this evening. Councillors, do I have a motion that the meeting go into camera and the matters to be considered which contain information relating to contractual matters?
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Sorais, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Members of the public, please be advised of our live streaming will be closed while this matter is considered in camera. Thank you.